What's up, everyone? Kind of a Tom? Big story in a big court case going on right in
Yeah,
our backyard, dealing with a certain former president. I'm not a criminal lawyer, never done criminal law, and frankly, as you know, I'm really not that into politics. Um, but how can you not be fascinated by this story? I mean, tons of our friends are asking us, "What's this all about?" I don't know all the answers, but you have a lot of the answers. And so you've done criminal law, you're into politics, and you were kind enough to spend some time with me and explain what's going on. Now, this is not a debate, okay? This is not a place for calling people names, hot takes. We're not presuming guilt or innocence. If you want that, go to Fox News, go to CNN, choose your cable outlet. Our goal today, as we discussed, introduce the players, explain the facts, outline the charges, and what's to be expected. So, Tommy, my man, it's great to see you. How you doing? Let's go.
great to see you, Josh. What a time to be alive, right? As Billy Joel said, we didn't start the fire, but it's definitely raging right now in current events.
A lot going on. So, big picture, obviously, we have an indictment in Fulton County, former president, 18 other folks alleged as co-conspirators in a criminal racketeering enterprise dealing with the 2020 election. So, indictment just came down. It is long. There's a lot to it. So first, let's just kind of start big picture. Like what is an indictment? What is the process to get it? And what's included in this one that people need to know?
Sure. So an indictment is really just the allegations, right? So it's the formal start of criminal charges in a felony case. To get it, you have to go to a grand jury. Grand jury is, you get a summons just like a regular jury, but your service is usually quite a bit longer than a typical trial. You don't, it doesn't typically sit continuously. You have periodic meetings, maybe every 2 weeks, every month. Um, this particular case was definitely unique in that a special grand jury was first assigned to the investigation phase. There was a lot of litigation about whether that was proper or not. And then, of course, the foreperson had a lot of fun and kind of publicized herself, making the rounds on the news media and was giggling and giddy about it, which led to more litigation. But once they finished their investigation, then a a new, more typical grand jury who would actually approve of the charges was impaneled.
So what's the
And
process? Are people presenting evidence, testimony, documents saying this is what we believe the case is about, this is what we think they did wrong, and then they decide if there's enough there to charge? Is that what happens?
yes, so grand jury proceedings are not adversarial. Typically, the defense is not allowed to be there. There are some exceptions to that rule, but typically the investigating officer will present their entire case file. Hearsay is admissible in the grand jury. They're able to lay out the case kind of in narrative form. In this case, they did bring in a lot of live witnesses to testify before the grand jury, which isn't usually typical, but there's nothing about this case that's typical. What I think is interesting, of course, there are 19 defendants named and charged in the indictment. What may be equally as important as those 19 is who are not named and charged in the indictment. There are
The unindicted co-conspirators, as they're referred to.
yes, or individual 1 through 30. Many of those are going to be cooperating witnesses, people who could have been charged, who have made immunity deals with the DA. We know that at least 8 of the quote unquote fake electors or alternate slate of electors, which we'll get into quite a bit later, but they were reported as getting immunity deals. Only 3 of the 16 alternate slate of electors were actually indicted. So it's likely that up to 13 of them actually testified before the grand jury.
So we hear people referred to as like they've gone state's witness or something. Is that what you mean? Like they will become testifying witnesses for the prosecution in exchange for some sort of a plea deal or
Yes,
immunity?
and they may not necessarily be helpful to the prosecution. They make an immunity deal saying you can't charge me in exchange for my truthful testimony. And maybe their truthful testimony leads a jury to think there was no crime committed here. So they will be presented, or they may not be presented by the prosecution. They don't have to present everyone who got an immunity deal in a eventual trial. But yes, that's what they did. They turned state's evidence, and they voluntarily, or under this immunity deal, testified or gave interviews with the DA's office. And they are not able, once they do that immunity deal, they are not able to plead the Fifth Amendment.
Got it.
Right.
So are you able to give like an elevator pitch or a 30,000-foot view? You love all these kind of metaphors I'm using about what this case is about. I mean, we could talk about it for an hour, but can you just kind of dumb it down for all of us and say this is the core of what this case is about?
Sure. I don't think we'd be here at all unless there was this alternate slate of elector scheme that went forward. So there are, I'll say, three main categories of charges here. The first category I'd call lies, damn lies, and statistics. That's, Mark Twain came up with that, but there's a lot of obviously charges that are based on false information, false statements, false filings, false testimony to congressional hearings or General Assembly hearings, committee hearings, perjury charges. So that's one category, is things that were false. The next category I'll call what's in this coffee. So Coffee County is a rural county in Georgia where the local GOP chairperson and the local Coffee County election supervisor are charged with allowing Trump's team to come in, access voting machines, download documents, download information, and take that back to Trump's team to figure out what happened with Dominion voting systems. So what's in this coffee? What's happened in Coffee County? The third category is where's Ruby? So Ruby Freeman was a poll worker at State Farm Arena. There's been a ton of publicity about these boxes or containers of ballots that were found under a table that is on video, and whether or not those were fraudulent ballots, whether they were run through multiple times. But this person, Ruby Freeman, and her daughter were identified early on by Trump's team, and it led to these three people from outside of the state to come and take it upon themselves to try to get Ruby to basically confess to rigging the election or putting through fraudulent votes. So those three are the types of charges in this. Obviously, I think the fraud, the fraudulent electors or the alternate slate of elector scheme is the heart of the matter.
So RICO is the charge that is consistent throughout all 19 folks, right? And the idea for that, and I really don't know how RICO works criminally, but they were all joined together to conspire to carry out, these events that they say would overturn or change the election. Is that kind of the main meat of the charges, that all 19 of these are grouped in together, and then each individual person has their own separate charge?
That's right. So the RICO charges, count one of the indictment, and it goes on for, I think, 68 pages, just laying out the RICO conspiracy. The RICO was originally set up to prosecute mafia leaders. Obviously, in movies, in popular culture, we've seen that the Don, the Godfather, they insulate themselves from the actual racketeering activities, the extortion, the loan sharking, all the things that the mob does. So legislators decided we need a way to get the big fish, and they said, well, if we can show that this is an enterprise that benefits those leaders and they are directing those underneath them, then we can get the big fish and cut off the head of the snake. to mix metaphors.
Yeah, and so RICO has now been expanded for situations like this, where you're trying to group all these folks together and keep going up to the tip top about who's orchestrating it. And is that kind of right?
Right. So, the law is broad enough to encompass enterprises that aren't necessarily for monetary profit, but are engaged in illegal activities for the benefit of the top of the pyramid.
And RICO is a felony charge, right?
Correct.
And so what would be, I don't know if you know about like a sentencing guideline or typical punishment that comes with a RICO charge?
I believe it has a 5-year mandatory minimum. So if anyone is convicted of that charge, they are definitely going to prison.
Okay. So these 19 people, some obviously are more famous than the others. President Trump and Rudy Giuliani being right at the top of that, all the way down to local lawyers here in Atlanta and bail bondsmen. So we've read these 19 names. Some jump out to us, others don't. You created a great chart that you're sharing right now in the heart of a kind of RICO mafia type of a thing. So this is great to help people kind of understand who these people are. Go through it however you want, please.
Sure. So obviously at the top we have Donald Trump. The Donald, he's been known as that for a long, long time. Comparing him to mafiosos, he obviously made a lot of money in casinos in Atlantic City. My family has actually been employed by some of his casinos. So he's always been called the Donald. And so he's the Don at the top there. I've got Mark Meadows, who was his chief of staff, White House chief of staff, labeled as the consigliere, which is, sort of his right-hand man, confidant, advisor. And then to the right of him is Jeffrey Clark, who is a appointed official in the Department of Justice, who we can get into sort of what he did. But I've put those three at the top in green because they are the federal officials involved here who have a statutory ability to remove the case to federal court. And we can talk about the mechanisms of that later. But so obviously they're going to be at the top of the pyramid here. The next line is going to be Trump's national legal team. I'll affectionately refer to them as the Four Seasons Landscaping and Legal Services team. If you remember the press conference that Rudy held in Pennsylvania that was supposed to be at Four Seasons Hotel, but ended up at Four Seasons Total Landscaping. So these folks are involved in not just the Georgia scheme or the Georgia mechanisms to try to allow Trump to win the popular vote in Georgia, but also in multiple other states. And they are sort of the ones who had the most media exposure. So that's sort of the next line. Under them is going to be more local focused folks. Michael Roman, I put under this level here. He is not a local person to Georgia, but he is not a lawyer, and he was definitely involved in the other states. So I left him on this line. Ray Smith and Bob Cheeley are both Georgia lawyers who became part of the team and ended up presenting evidence in legislative hearings in Georgia, and they are also charged in the alternate elector scheme. Over to the far right there, Scott Hall, who, as you mentioned, he's the bail bondsman in this. He was also a poll watcher, so he was, at some of the election precincts watching the count. He kind of had his fingers in all of this. It's kind of strange that he touched so many different parts of this, being, sort of a non-lawyer, a non-campaign official, but he had direct contact with Jeff Clark at the DOJ. He had direct contact with Bob Cheeley. He had direct contact. He was part of the crew that went to the Coffee County elections office. And he also had contact with at least one of the people who had approached Ruby Freeman, the poll worker.
Can I take a second and just say that every time you say Scott Hall, I think of Razor Ramon. I'm sorry. I just do. I just do. Yeah, the old WWF wrestler, that was his name, Scott Hall. And for a second there, I had to go check Wikipedia and just confirm that Razor Ramon in his post wrestling career, number one, he was alive, and number two, that he isn't now a bail bondsman. So sorry for that.
No problem. That's good to confirm. They're definitely, some of these names are relatively common, so it's good to differentiate. And so then the next line there is, a little bit more foot soldiers to continue the mob metaphor. Sean Still, who was a Georgia state senator, or is a Georgia state senator, David Schaefer, the former Georgia Republican Party chairman, Kathy Latham here was the Coffee County Republican chairperson, sorry. And I've put her in purple here because she is both charged in the elector scheme, which is sort of in blue, as well as the voting machine scheme, which is in sort of the pale red to the right there. She was one of the electors who signed the certificates that Donald Trump had duly won Georgia. So she, David Schaefer, and Sean Still are the 3 of the 16 electors who are actually charged.
So when you say these fake electors, again, I don't mean to bring levity to this, but I just can't help myself. I mean, when I hear fake elector or fake something, I'm thinking about impersonators, and I immediately think of, remember Bobby Valentine, the old Mets coach? He got kicked out of that game for arguing balls and strikes. He comes back in wearing the mustache and the long hair and trying to be incognito so the umpires don't see that he's back on the field. When you say fake elector, I mean, like, are people saying, hey, look, we are people that have the ability to serve as electoral college and sign and certify who won the state of Georgia? Is that what's happening, or being alleged to have happened?
Yes. That one of the charges is impersonating a public officer, and that's what Sean Still, David Schaefer, and Kathy Latham, one of their charges in the list. So you have to remember your civics lesson and what the Electoral College actually is. It is a meeting of real people who actually submit their votes, and those are the votes that are the literal votes that decide the presidency. It's not the popular vote across the country. It's not even the popular vote in each state. The popular vote decides which electors are supposed to go to the Electoral College, but those electors are able to vote their heart. And we have seen in the past what we call faithless electors who have pledged their support for one candidate. That candidate wins the state, and when they get to the Electoral College, they vote for somebody else. There are specific procedures outlined in federal law about when these electors have to meet, the format they need to submit their votes. And so that required the Electoral College to meet in each state on December 14th. So the election had been certified by Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State. Brian Kemp was certainly on board with that, said, we are going to certify this election for Joe Biden in Georgia. Joe Biden's slate of 16 electors went to the Capitol on December 14th. They met in I think the House chamber, the main chamber, sort of a more formal ceremony. I don't know if the media was there or not, but I have seen pictures from it. I personally have friends with some of the electors who were there. But at the exact same time, or same day at least, this group of 16 Republicans also went to the Capitol, reserved a private conference room, not one of the big chambers, and they met for their own Electoral College. There were actually 4 original electors who had been designated by the Trump campaign who didn't show up for that. And David Schaefer, who was the chairman of their meeting, or someone else, whoever, arranged for 4 more people to show up, and the 12 original just voted those 4 in, so they had a full slate of 16.
And
So
16 is the important number because, of course, that's the number of votes that Georgia has for electoral college. It's going to ultimately, decide the presidential election, right? California's got however many they have. Florida's got what they have. 16 is our state's number.
Right. So it's basically it corresponds to the number of congressmen we have. So those numbers can change depending on population. So you can sometimes get more congressmen in the House of Representatives, so you would get more electoral college votes for your state. But that's the 270 number, right? That we always see, the race to 270. Georgia's electoral college has 16 votes. So one of the biggest defense I think you're going to hear from all of the people in blue and Kathy in purple there is that they were just trying to maintain their right to be later deemed the proper electors. So they didn't want to, let's say on January 5th, we do find a big tranche of fraudulent ballots in Georgia. And Raffensperger says, actually, no, Trump won this. But their deadline of December 14th had passed. And so there would have been some sort of pushback saying, well, your electors didn't follow the law. They're not going to be counted. Gotcha. So I think that's sort of the innocent explanation for what they were doing.
Got it. How about these folks in red? What is their role in all of this?
Down in the bottom corner?
Yes.
The bright red?
Yeah.
So Stephen Lee is a Lutheran pastor in suburban Chicago. He caught the bug, I guess, of this publicity of Ruby Freeman, and he came down to Georgia and just went and knocked on her door. And basically he's alleged to have offered help to her. I think she had already been getting threats against her and her family, and he initially was just trying to get a chance to talk with her. He is alleged to have felt that maybe Miss Freeman was not willing to speak with him as a white man. And so he then recruited Harrison Floyd, also from out of state, who was the executive director of Black Voices for Trump, to come in and do the same, try to speak with Ruby Freeman. And he in turn recruited, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her name, but Trevion Cutty, who at one point was Kanye West's publicist, to come and also engage in this contact with Ruby Freeman. They eventually convinced her to meet them in person at a Cobb County police station, and they are alleged to have tried to get her to confess to counting fake ballots, or they're alleged to basically intimidate her as a witness, both in the grand jury here in Georgia, but she was also testified in the January 6th committee hearings in Washington.
Got it. All right. So those are the 19. That's a fantastic chart you put together to help us all explain it. Let's take that chart away so I can see that beautiful face of yours at a larger scale. And talk about the other players, which is the district attorney that's bringing this, the judge that's presiding over it. I mean, they're in the eye of the hurricane, man. They weren't necessarily household names a month ago, but they are now. So Fani Willis is the Fulton County DA. What do we know about her?
So yes, Fani, or I think they pronounce it Fani Willis. She succeeded Paul Howard some years ago. She has sort of made her name as a very successful prosecutor, largely in murder cases. She's also has some experience with this RICO statute, not only in sort of more traditional monetary schemes, but she also is the one who headed up the prosecution of the Atlanta public school teachers cheating scandal, which eventually led to, I think, 11 convictions um, under this RICO statute. So she obviously is not brand new. She knows what she's doing. She has had success, sort of using this RICO statute maybe a little bit differently from how it was, excuse me, originally designed. But she has a huge office. Fulton County is obviously the biggest DA's office in Georgia. There's the most amount of crime in Fulton County than any other county. I think she mentioned in her press conference, she's overseen 11,000 crimes since she's been in office.
So what sorts of resources in terms of assistant DAs, investigators, paralegals, if you want to use that kind of word, like what kind of resources is the Fulton County DA's office arming to put towards this case? And what is her day-to-day role going to be in it?
Well, that's a good question. They certainly have many investigators in the office. Many of them were the ones who actually interviewed all of these players, the unindicted co-conspirators, other witnesses for the grand jury. Prior to the grand jury, they would have their own interviews, and then they would bring them to the grand jury. And those investigators were the ones that presented the case. She has a lot of other crimes going on in Atlanta and the other cities in Fulton County. So it's not her entire office. She can't possibly devote her entire office to it, but they do have a lot of resources. They've also, I believe, they have enlisted some outside counsel as sort of special prosecutors to come in. Some folks who have also had some RICO experience in the past, and I think they're serving pro bono. So as a Georgia taxpayer, they wouldn't be paying them. But
I was going to ask you that. So that's a lawyer in private practice that gets hired by the county to participate in the prosecution. I in the past I've known that to mean they submit bills and their bills are paid by the taxpayers, albeit at a lower rate. But you're saying here they're doing it because they want to be involved pro bono. Like what's that?
That's something that certainly hearsay from me. I don't know that for a fact, but it's been reported on another podcast. Actually, a friend of mine who I used to work with in DeKalb as a prosecutor who said he's working for free.
So as a former prosecutor yourself, I mean, can you wrap your mind around the job that lays ahead of them to bring this case to trial whenever that we'll get to the timing later on, but just what's ahead of her?
I never had a case with 19 people in the same case. The sheer legal firepower that is going to be coming at Fani and her office is really hard to imagine. They're going to be motion practice from every single defendant. Some of them may early on decide, we didn't think you were going to bring these charges against me. That's why I didn't seek immunity before. But now I see what's happening, and I'm gonna, I'm ready to play ball. So I think it'll get whittled down some, but it is extremely unwieldy. And Willis's public comments that she wants to bring the case to trial in March is totally impossible.
Yeah, that seems impossible. Now, one of the other questions she was asked as she was walking off the stage at the press conference is, are you going to be personally trying the case? What's the precedent for the DA being the one that actually is up there as lead counsel doing the work in court?
The highest profile cases, the DA would typically be the trial counsel on them. When I was in DA's office, our elected DA handled death penalty cases for the most part. If there were other public corruption cases, they would handle those. The ones that are the highest profile, we had a lot of cases that made an awful lot of publicity that weren't handled by the elected DA. but this is national news. Former president, she's going to take point on it.
Yeah, I think so too. Now, the way judges are selected in civil cases, the wheel is spun, and where it lands, and that's who the judge is. Same thing hold true in criminal cases.
That's exactly right. In fact, there was reported that there was sort of a leaked set of charges on the Fulton County Clerk's website that assigned it to a different judge. Apparently, that was sort of a test run, and that wasn't the real one. But yes, the judge who's been assigned was basically just on the wheel, a random spin of the wheel. Who next one up when the indictment actually hits the system.
Judge Scott McAfee, young guy. He's in his early 30s, been a judge for a minute, but he's been involved in prosecution of cases and government work for a long time. His resume is nothing to slouch at, but this is a big deal for any judge, much less him. So what do we know about him and his ability to handle this?
Yeah, I don't know him at all. I've been out of Georgia for over 12 years now, so he wasn't even a lawyer the last I was there, but he served as the Georgia Inspector General before being appointed to the bench. I believe just this year. So yes, he is as green around the ears as they come, and he has a very sticky wicket to try to maneuver with this. He's an Emory law grad. By all accounts, I assume he's capable, but Judge, you are been in front of a lot of different judges. The older ones are the ones that are very able to narrow things down, get to the heart of the matter, speed things up. I don't know that he has that sort of trait quite yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's something that only comes with time and experience, and through no fault of his own, he just hasn't gotten that yet. I mean, I think that it's going to be a balancing act with 19 individual defendants and 19 sets of lawyers, and as you said, motions coming in every day, lawyers coming in from across the country, lawyers coming in obviously from our own backyard in Atlanta, from South Georgia. I mean, just managing all of it in and of itself, from his clerks and his staff attorneys and all that, like that's a monumental task too. Forget just the law side of it.
Yeah, I mean, these judges have large caseloads. If you think of it as 19 different cases, that's just sort of another 19 to their stack of hundreds. So, like anything else, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? That's the only thing they can do.
Yeah, I hear you, and that's right. And if you do think of it as 19 separate cases, just to add to the stack, but they're not 19. They're not just 19 cases. Yeah, they're 19 the most important cases he's probably ever going to preside over, and probably going to have the most media attention and scrutiny. I mean, every day that there's a decision made or a ruling made or an argument made, like people are going to pick that apart, and people already made their minds up, right? Like whatever side they're on, they're on. He is a Kemp appointee, though, right? So he at least leans towards a way that Kemp felt like he'd be a good judge. Read that as you want, but are people already kind of looking at that as something that could play a role in the case?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, obviously Kemp pushed back against the president in these efforts to win Georgia. So I think I respect Brian Kemp. I know him personally. Known him for many years. I wouldn't think he's just stacking the bench with ideologues. I think he's appointing fair judges. I agree with you that the appointment process is going to have some political overtones to it, but I don't have any reservations that this is somebody who's going to handle the case in a partisan manner.
I agree with you. And that's how I want to see it play out. So last player question. We can't go through all 19 lawyers and firms and groups that have been hired, but I think people are curious about who Trump decided to hire. He hired a local Atlanta guy, someone who there's a team of 3. So what you got on his legal team?
Right. So Drew Findling is a very high profile criminal defense attorney. I think most of his practice has been in federal court. I did cross paths with him in probably my highest profile case as a prosecutor. It's something. It's interesting that having been covered by a media on a criminal case, I am very versed in the fact that the media gets a lot wrong about how these cases develop, what kind of charges defendants face. So that experience, I always try to go to the source material. So I combed through this indictment. I read as many official court filings as I could. I definitely read some articles as well. But anyway, back to Findling. He's a sharp guy. He has a good temperament. He's not. I think he's a good choice in probably sharp comparison to the national team we discussed before, 5 of whom are his co-defendants in the case. He's going to be aggressive. I think in the case I handled with him, he was very proactive, coming forward before the indictment to work out of the best deal that he could. It's not going to happen here. Trump obviously has already been indicted, and Trump is adamant he's never done anything wrong, so he's never going to plea. He has brought in another lawyer who I know from my past, Jennifer Little, who respect very much. She was a prosecutor in DeKalb County, has been doing white collar crime for over a decade, and I'm pleased that he hired them, because I do trust that they will be ethical lawyers, and they will try the case within the bounds of the law.
Cool. That's all we can ever expect, right? So we've just outlined all the players, the DA, the judge, the defendants. I think that people now have a better understanding of at least who's involved, right? If you got some more time, let's do another video, another discussion about kind of more the meat of the case and how you see it playing out, and how the prosecutors are going to try to prove things, and how defense is going to defend things. And then we all can be educated when the whole thing goes down. You good?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. I hope you found this informative. I hope that we kept our goal up of, or our promise, I should say, of just laying out the facts. Tom, I'm always amazed at what you have in that brain of yours, and thank you for sharing with us. So thank you all for listening, and we will see you soon.